Today we're going to be taking a look at the latest NHL trade rumors for some of the biggest deals that did not happen at or around the NHL trade deadline. There was a lot of big names in play that didn't end up going, but what almost happened? We'll discuss that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, today I want to take a look at some different topics here. We're back to the trade rumor talk, but yes, I know there's not going to be any trades for a little while, but there's a lot of talk of things that almost happened or came close that were being discussed that I thought would be an interesting conversation here to take a look at. It's always fun to look and say what could have happened or what almost happened. It could have changed the NHL landscape and could have put some players in different uniforms, and just to make things interesting and fun here to talk about here on the channel. Now, first up, I want to talk about Ducks captain Ryan Getzlaf. Now, Ryan Getzlaf is a player that many felt likely would stay in Anaheim. He's a pending unrestricted free agent. There's been some reports that maybe he retired, but most feel he'll likely re-sign, obviously for less money than he's making now, and continue to be the Ducks captain and help lead some of these young players through the next stage of the Ducks rebuild. Now, of course, he could decide to move on, but it's doubtful. That's most people's kind of general gut feeling on Getzlaf. However, there were some conversations that took place that almost sent him to other clubs. Like, for example, the Montreal Canadiens had inquired with the Ducks on Getzlaf's availability. Obviously, Marc Bergevin was interested. Of course, they would have had to do some cap juggling. Maybe they wouldn't have picked up Eric Staal, because I believe the Habs inquiring was a little bit further ahead, and I'm pretty sure that took place from what we've heard before the Staal trade. So likely wouldn't have done both there. But still, the Habs were interested. Just wanted to touch base and see if there was any remote possibility of making that work. But the team that was closer, which would have preferred for Getzlaf, was the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, it's believed here, based on reports from NHL insiders, that Getzlaf talked to GM Bob Murray in Anaheim and said that he would waive his no-trade clause if he could make it work to go to Vegas. He had a little bit more likelihood to accept that because Vegas isn't as far away. So from a family perspective, he felt more comfortable and better about things in that regard. Wasn't too far and all that. So there were talks between the Ducks as well as Vegas here to kind of see if they could make a trade happen. Unfortunately for Vegas and for Getzlaf, it never came to be. Never got close enough to make it work. We saw the Vegas Golden Knights. They did acquire Matthias Janmark from Chicago, but clearly the center ice position is an area that could be upgraded in Vegas. And a guy like Ryan Getzlaf to come in and play, a lesser role than he does in Anaheim and more of a middle six type of thing, really could have been a really good fit. I mean, Bob Murray and the Ducks could have retained 50%. They might have needed a third team to broker the deal like we saw some other places, so that Vegas could have got him for 25%. If that could have worked, then perhaps it would have happened. I don't know exactly what caused it to not happen, but Getzlaf was willing to go to Vegas. It was the only team that we know of, at least, that he was willing to waive for because it's close and all that. If the other California teams were closer to being a contender, maybe he would have talked to them. But at the end of the day, Getzlaf to Vegas was a thing. It was the conversations around it. It came close, but apparently they just could not make it work cap-wise due to the really tight and limited options on Vegas's standpoint. But still, it would have been interesting to see Ryan Getzlaf play for the Golden Knights, wouldn't it have been? Now, another more surprising name that came up at the deadline from Elliot Friedman. I've also heard it from a few other sources. I know there's a lot of Habs fans out there that don't really believe this, and you can believe what you want or don't want. I'm just going by what's being reported, that the Montreal Canadiens were interested in bringing in Tony DeAngelo from the New York Rangers. Of course, he's been sitting at home for the last few months, waiting for an opportunity, waiting to see if the Rangers could trade him. There's a real possibility that he could be bought out when the season is over, which is the most likely thing to take place now, especially where he wasn't traded. It was believed that they went around the league before and couldn't work out a trade for him anywheres. Everybody knew the Rangers were not going to bring him back, that he was done with them, so they had all the leverage. And I don't think the Rangers were too concerned about what the return would be, but they couldn't really retain much in the way of salary because that just wouldn't make sense. If they do a buyout in the offseason where DeAngelo's under the age of 27, he could actually be bought out for 1/3 of the contract instead of the normal 2/3 that more experienced players get. So therefore, he's going to lose more of the money there that he's not going to get paid. and the Rangers could get out of this without having a whole lot of dead cap space as a result of it. So that would make the most logical choice. So if a team wants to take DeAngelo for all or majority of his salary, okay, we'll work something out. But if they want the Rangers to retain 50% or something, it's just not going to work. It doesn't make sense from their perspective. But from the Montreal perspective, what they were talking about was they had engaged talks with the Rangers. Apparently is what's reported, that if the Rangers and DeAngelo could agree to a contract termination agreement like we saw Gusev and the Devils do, and that he could be put through unconditional waivers and be terminated, and that they would then sign him as a free agent, and then obviously they would sign him for a lesser, cheaper amount for this year to squeeze him in under the cap, and then they would give him more money beyond that to kind of make him hold, so he'd make up for what he's going to lose from the buyout. So that was certainly interesting, because if DeAngelo could have gotten himself on an NHL roster before the deadline was all over with, then he could have been eligible to play in the playoffs. But at the end of the day, DeAngelo did not want to do that, because he would have lost a little bit more money. I guess he, at the end of the day, I guess he rejected the Habs is what the report is, because even though he would have lost money, theoretically, they were going to agree to make him whole throughout the next season with the next contract, and he could have had a chance, but he didn't want to do that. So he must figure that he'll have an opportunity here to get paid better money as a free agent next offseason is what I'm thinking, or he didn't want to come to Canada. I really don't know what the reasons are behind it, but it is mind-boggling. I know I've seen the reaction to Montreal fans online, and trust me, I get it. I completely understand. To think that Marc Bergevin and the Habs were wanting to bring in a problem pass like Tony DeAngelo is mind-boggling. The guy can play hockey, terrific offensive defenseman. Could they have benefited from his play? Absolutely. From a PR standpoint, from a personality standpoint, does it make sense? Not really. Not from how the Montreal Canadiens tend to do business. We've seen this organization really be very particular on how players behave themselves. Look back to PK Subban, for example. Look at all the good he did in that community. Made massive donations, millions of dollars to the Children's Hospital in Montreal. Still viewed upon as being a locker room issue. And to this day, I know the Habs would never confirm it, but that's why he was traded. There was too many conflicts within that room that he just did not gel with the team. The team had issues with his big personality. They don't seem to like that there. That just doesn't seem to work for the Habs and organization. It's just not how they like to do business. They don't like it if a player comes across as being, more important than the logo on the front of the jersey. It's about the logo, not the name on the back type of deal. Just their philosophy. And I can respect that to some degree. Obviously, I don't really have too many issues, but you can't be too uptight at the same time. But I understand why it's so mind-boggling and why Habs fans don't want to believe it, because it goes against a lot of the things that we saw in the past. It doesn't make sense. Why would they do this based on how they do business? It would have been a PR nightmare, likely, in Montreal. But at the end of the day, that's what the reports are, and there's enough insiders reporting that they believe this to be true that you have to think there's more to it, that it's not just them fabricating a click for their articles online. That's my take. Obviously it never happened. It's not going to happen. But it would have been interesting from a variety of standpoints. It'd be interesting to see what their blue line would be like, having a guy like as dynamic as him offensively back there. At the same time, I can just imagine what the reaction would have been. It would have been nuts. And, from somebody who's non-partial, it might have been entertaining, but still, hard to imagine that Montreal would go down that road, really. I do get the reaction online. Now, there's also reports that the Toronto Maple Leafs, as many trades as they made, that they were also trying to acquire Connor Garland from the Arizona Coyotes. Now, obviously, some of the other deals that we saw may not have actually ended up happening if they would have got Garland instead. But Connor Garland, as we had reported on before, was getting attention. It's not even so much that the Coyotes wanted to move him. It's just people are looking at the Coyotes situation. They're looking at Bill Armstrong being a new GM, not really, invested too much in the group there, that they want to make changes. We know that the Coyotes are really short on draft currency. They lost a lot of picks, especially, higher end first, second round type of option. So they could use a player or two that they could move out to regain some picks and kind of, to some degree sort of start fresh. They never really got too far with the current group, but maybe they would entertain that kind of offer. He's really far exceeded expectations. He's making under $800,000, so I could see from a contract and cap perspective why a lot of teams would pick up the phone and call Bill Armstrong and be like, hey, would you be interested in moving this guy? Like, for what he's worth, you could probably pick up at least a couple of picks. Maybe second and third, maybe it's a first. I don't know what they would got, but the Leafs were certainly interested in inquiring, and I think Garland would have been a player that they could have kept. They do see him as being an option, also a cheaper option too, in case they have trouble signing Zach Hyman, which I really don't think they're going to do. I don't see Zach Hyman going anywhere. I honestly feel that he'll end up probably taking far less than his value just to be a Leaf, because that's what Zach Hyman is. He's a Leaf. He's a team guy from the area. I don't think he has any desire to go anywhere else, and I'll be shocked if they don't sign Hyman to some sort of mutual, probably team-friendly contract. That's what I envision happening, but we'll see. But I guess he would have been like a backup in case they couldn't get it done, because they'd still have Garland at the lower price tag for a little bit longer. But certainly something that obviously never came to be, but they certainly were having conversations. Things never got too close, but they were, at least having some intent conversations, and things were at least, on the forefront there before they pulled the trigger on some of these other moves that they ended up making. Now, the Pittsburgh Penguins obviously ended up acquiring Jeff Carter in somewhat of a surprise deal. A lot of us didn't really see that coming. Obviously, Carter has history with Ron Hextall in Los Angeles. It's kind of funny to see a couple of prominent former Flyers players and management. Of course, Hextall is a player and manager. And then, of course, Carter, a longtime player, have prominent roles in Pittsburgh and have a chance at doing some damage here in the playoffs while the Flyers continue to struggle here lately. I'm sure Flyers fans don't like the looks of that. But obviously, before they went out and got Jeff Carter from Los Angeles, apparently they were trying hard and really seriously considered getting Travis Zajac from New Jersey. Now, of course, Zajac had a form of a no trade, so he had some say over where he went. Doesn't mean he would have agreed to it. Now, if the option with the Islanders may not have come up, then perhaps he might have. I can't say for sure that he wouldn't, but they were in on him before the Carter situation came up. So I'm still surprised they went out and done that. Hopefully things work out. I know Jeff Carter still has a little bit of term on his contract, and we'll see if he can get things going the way he used to be able to play. His numbers are certainly down a bit, but for given the role he'd be expected to play in Pittsburgh, hopefully he can live up to expectations. But it would have been interesting to see Zajac there in lieu of Carter getting dealt from the Kings. Now, lastly here, I want to touch on Taylor Hall. There was a lot of stuff going on around Hall, and as I had reported here on my opinion a few times, I really felt for the longest time that it was either going to be the Islanders or the Boston Bruins, where he ended up going. Now, obviously, I also mentioned numerous times that there were other teams having conversations. There was other interests, including the Maple Leafs. But as I said, I don't think the Leafs really had Hall very high on their list. I think they were checking in just to see, but they never really had him too high on the priority list, and they only would have circled back there if a lot of the other things that they were working on or had ranked higher in priority never came through and the price came down lower enough that maybe. But I don't think he was really a big option. Of course, Hall had a no-move clause and had a lot of say over where he went, but still, the Islanders and the Bruins were the only teams that were really close. Now, before Lou Lamoriello pulled the trigger on the Kyle Palmieri, Travis Zajac trade from the Devils, they were in heavily on Hall, and there was even points where the Islanders thought they had a deal. It looks as though, and many believe, that Hall would have waived to go to the Islanders, even though many believe Boston was his first choice. But obviously, his good buddy Jordan Eberle plays with the Islanders, and it is believed that he would have waived for them and thought that it was coming together to go there. But once the Islanders pulled the trigger on the other deal, they weren't completely out on Hall, but they had to take a step back to reevaluate. Boston came in a little bit more, and once Taylor Hall knew Boston was involved, it seemed like he was intent on making that happen. It is believed here that the Sabres did have a better offer than the offer they received from Boston. I'm not sure 100% on who that team was. It could have been the Islanders, or it could have been another team that we're interested in. I know there was a Western team that was rumored to be pushing hard too, which we can't 100% confirm who it was, but there was some talk about maybe the St. Louis Blues being that team. Even Vegas, to some degree, were in on Hall too, which is kind of why I think they were not really pushing too hard for Getzlaf, is they were trying to make the Hall deal work. I don't think they were in too close on Hall, but still a lot of moving parts there. But at the end of the day, the Islanders were the closest outside of Boston. But I'll tell you, I believe all along that Boston was his first choice. Now, some of you may not realize this, but when he signed with Buffalo, he was probably really the closest to going to Boston besides the Sabres. He had reportedly had been offered upwards of, I believe it was between $5 or $6 million from Boston. But obviously he got more money in Buffalo, but there was mutual interest. They were trying to work it out. The Bruins just could not make the space to get anything more than that on the table for him. And therefore Buffalo came calling with $8 million. So he figured on a one-year deal he would try to make it work. And I think he probably knew all along there was a good chance he'd be dealt by the trade deadline. Of course, unless the team was having more success in going for the playoffs. But either way, he could reevaluate in a year, see what happens. He bet on himself. And unfortunately, it didn't work out. But clearly, the intent was not for that to take place. But the Bruins have coveted Hall for some time. Many believe that there's a really good chance that Taylor Hall and the Boston Bruins will work out a longer-term working arrangement. But before they get that far, they have the next 10, 12, 13 games, whatever's left here, for there to be like an audition between Hall and the Bruins to see if the fit is as good as they thought it was in the offseason. If things work out and he's showing that he can fit in and help produce that secondary scoring that they so badly need, then I would suspect that he won't make it to free agency, because it sounds like he's quite content and happy to be a Bruin, and I do think there could be a good fit there. I know last night's game, his first game with the Bruins against his old team, the Sabres, you can probably say he didn't have the greatest game. I thought he might come out with a little bit more jump, but certainly trying to feel out his way with his new team. That's probably going to take a few games, but if things go the way I think they could, then I would be likely that I think that there's a good chance that he'll work out there and that he will re-sign. But those are the other teams that were in on Hall, and like I said, as much as it got close, he had all the leverage. And at the end of the day, Adams approached him and said, "Hey Taylor, I've got a better offer than what Boston's giving me here from a Western team." He probably just said, "Yep, that's not my problem. I have a no move clause. I don't want to go there. I want to go to Boston, make it work." And at the end of the day, that's what they had to do. So I know that the return for Adams and the Sabres was underwhelming, but I think his hands were tied. Once Hall knew Boston was in on him, that's what he wanted, and he really had no choice. So what are you supposed to do? I mean, as much as you kind of rag on him a little bit for not doing better, you can't expect much better when you have all the leverage gone right out the window. So let me know your thoughts on these trades that were close, and imagine what things could have been had they actually happened. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.